Hey there, David. Are you with us?
Dr. Simeon, how are you, sir?
Hey, how are you today?
Excellent. How do you hear me?
You're sounding really great. Sounds very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Say, listen, David, one of our YouTube viewers started referring to you as Brother Whitecrow.
I love it.
Can I call you Brother Whitecrow?
Yes, you may. Thank you. I'm honored, sir. Thank you. And may I call you Dr. Simeon occasionally?
Well, you can call me whatever you want. Actually, Simeon's fine.
How about a friend? You're a good friend. I think over the last episodes, I've developed an excellent relationship with you, and I consider you part of the family.
Oh, thanks very much, David. I feel the same way, and I have to tell you, there isn't a day that goes by now that I don't think about your stories a little bit, and wonder, how the universe really works. So, thank you.
Yes, well, that's very puzzling, and it's kind of like where science ends and speculation begins. And I think our contribution is going to change that speculation to, reality and the truth above all.
Right. It's pretty clear from your stories and many other people's stories that our description, our scientific description of reality is just incomplete. There's just more going on.
Yes, I totally agree. I thought we might like to start off with me making an apology. Over the last month or so, since we've connected, I've had to do some back searching, and I found my DD-214. I've had a problem trying to get back my enrollment into the Stars and Stripes to get the records I need for that feature that I was honored in the publication when I was aboard the Nimitz. So I'm still working on that. And I had some big Sur photos of the location where I saw that UFO off of Vandenberg Airport Base. Yeah. So I'm working on the
first episode, right. Yeah, that early sighting when you were a teenager, right? Yeah.
And I wanted to make a correction. It wasn't MUFON who had the photographs of that pilot that photographed the UFO over Johnson Island that I sent you. He sent the photograph to NICAP. He sent it to NICAP. And,
that was from NICAP. NICAP.
Yeah, NICAP.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
NICAP. Excuse me. Yeah.
One of the original UFO research organizations. Right.
Yeah. They're still online, but they're not in they're just up for educational purposes. They're no longer active, but they have a host of information people could research online from their archives if they want to go there.
Right. Concerning your DD-214 form, you did send something that's very similar to that, which is your letter of commendation from May 16th, 1980.
Yes, correct. Yeah, it has all my stations that I've been assigned to, the ships, shore duty assignments and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it lists, I'm going to put it up here on the video, but it lists all the ships that you served on, and you really have quite a record there. I mean, you were at many different locations and many different naval ships.
Yeah, that's it started with the Finch. I never realized when serving aboard the Finch would open up so many hatches, as we called them in the Navy, opportunities, and it would lead right to the top, kind of like in between the enlisted ranks and the officer ranks. I didn't have a very high, status. I made it to E6, but I was a seaman. I was a seaman third class when I started to rub elbows with the officers, in the upper levels of the Navy ladder. So I got a lot of exposure, and that's why a lot of the things that I'm sharing with you and the public in general is one-on-one. A lot of it might be second-hand or third-hand, but I'll tell you what, it's pretty doggone close to the truth.
So what you're saying, David, is the average sailor aboard the Finch wouldn't have known the things that you know because you got to know the officers because of your position there, right?
Yeah, my position as an artist. I hate to say this, but I'd love to write a book. I'd love to write a book on that end called the U.S. Navy's Rembrandt. You know what I mean? Because that got me in places where normal people wouldn't go. I wouldn't fraternize with the officers in my command or my division while I was aboard ship or on duty, but I would be invited to their homes, after normal working hours to have dinner, to go hunting, to go fishing, all kinds of stuff. See. Yeah. But, in return, of course, I would, willingly give them, my talent. I would do portraits. I would do, gifts, or requests, and so, by word of mouth, it got around, and it was kind of like the inner circle, ComShaw. They call it ComShaw in the Navy. I don't know what about the other services, but the term is called ComShaw. It's a bartering system, and so that's how I was able to get my foot in the door.
Did you do paintings for these officers of portraits or landscape paintings or things for them outside of your official artist duties where you were sketching?
Yes. Of course. As an illustrator draftsman, I worked in the departments, for example, where they did the visual aids, training aids. In those days, they had slide presentations or opaque projector presentations. They didn't have computers. They didn't have dry boards and things like that. So I would have to come up with the graphics and the maps and the documentation for slide presentations. And so, that was my professional skill. I was a photographer's aide. I was a printer's aide, in the publishing department. I worked with journalists. Sure. When I was up at NAS Lemoore, I worked with engineers, building engineers as an architectural rendering artist. My field is very diversified, but the irony of it, although I had all this skill, when I retired and went to work for GTE, they were just getting into the computer-based systems, and I just kind of wanted to branch off, continuing doing graphics, visual aids by hand. I didn't want to screw around with the early development of Lisa and Macintosh and all the other Apple computer systems that were developing their graphic systems. So I got kind of left behind, and when I left GTE, it was ready for me to leave. And here's a little footnote. I think in episode 1 I mentioned that I was going up in the Finch to become a radar tech, and it was a very short career. I think it lasted maybe a month or so. It was based on the fact, if you can go back to some early YouTube CIC radar departments where it's in the dark room with radar scopes, and you see a guy up there, he's drawing with a grease pencil on a glass pane chart in reverse so that everybody in the room can see him, see it correctly, but he has to do everything in reverse. Well, that's where I flunked out. I just couldn't get it. I would go up there and I would have to plot, all these UFOs and USOs and all this stuff, but I'd get it wrong. And the commanding officer in CIC would say, "Hey, Noble, come on, get it right, will you?" So, that ended my career. I just couldn't do it.
It had to be reversed because you're writing on glass, right? You're drawing on glass.
Yeah. The chart. Yeah. So all the quartermaster and the officer in charge of the Central Intelligence Center there, he could get a big view. Like it's not like today we have computers and you can see a panorama of what's going on there. Yeah. In those days, you had to. I'm sorry.
No, David. Did you just say that? That they were plotting the positions of UFOs and USOs on a continual basis, like this?
Yeah. On the Finch. I was directly one-on-one with that. As far as the Nimitz was concerned, I would go into briefing rooms and I would hear the whispering going on about certain sightings or certain sonar beings that they couldn't identify, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't like the Finch where I really got hands-on, Aboard the Nimitz, I worked in the same compartment with all the...
David, how many... normally when we think of a naval ship out there or a fleet, and we think of them plotting targets, right?
Yes.
We would imagine from movies and so forth, at least in my case, that what they're plotting, enemy targets or other submarines from adversaries or other ships. And what you're telling us here is that what they were getting, a lot of what they were getting, the returns on the radar were UFOs and USOs, right?
Well, yeah, because conventionally speaking, during the Cold War, they had like Russian trawlers out there, and they were like spying on us, and we were spying on them, et cetera, et cetera. But we would be primarily concerned with tracking surface ships and bogies that came within the parameter of the nuclear test grounds out there in the Pacific Ocean. And a lot of those, some of those would be commercial, some of them would be commercial, some aircraft or, merchant marine ships, transports, oilers and stuff like that.
Got it.
And then, sonar techs would also have to distinguish between the whales, porpoises, enemy subs, and unknowns. They had their unknowns too. I would say, and this is what I know, we had more unknowns than we had traditional sightings. We had more unknowns than we had, because every ship out there was already marked. Everybody knew where everybody was. It didn't make any difference how far out you were on the horizon or how many nautical miles you might be up above or below the sea. Or everybody knew where but you're really concerned about the unidentifiables. Okay. We even knew where the Russian subs were. We knew where the Russian trawlers were, and the Chinese weren't involved, but we had the British and the French out there. Everybody's doing their war exercises. And during that period of time, getting close to, the Cuban crisis, all hell was breaking loose. So everybody had to have tags. But everybody was concerned about these so-called, what they had World War II. I even heard it mentioned aboard the Finch, right? Hey, we got Foo Fighters up there. And it was kind of like a joke because they couldn't identify what the hell they were. So that's what they called them.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. The Foo Fighters, the original Foo Fighters from World War II, not the rock band, the unidentified little. Yeah. So, David, what percent of those unknowns? I imagine some of your unknown tracks on radar could have a kind of ordinary explanation if you really looked into it. But what percent of them did they think were actually indications of intelligently controlled craft that they simply couldn't associate with any known country that we know about?
Well, if you look at the record of Blue Book and ICAP, but if you go deep throat into NORAD and some of the other pie in the sky lookers, I'm sure those logbooks would say it's more than 33% that was publicly announced. Okay, it's more than I personally would say 60 to 65% were mostly unknowns. And if you were a radar tech or sonar man, and your department head came by and asked you what's identifiable and what isn't, he would more likely write it off as a whale or as Venus if you were looking in the sky, Jupiter, they had nothing to associate on the ground level or sea level how to describe the pings or the blips or any of the descriptions coming in that had to be just listed as unknown. So there were more unknowns than there were identifiables. Yeah.
And you're saying a large percentage of those unknowns, if you had asked your commanding officer at the time what he really thought all these years later, in your gut, you would say 30, 40, 50, 60% of those unknowns were really...
Yeah, I would say 60% of the unknowns were, in their mind's eye, intellectually controlled, but not identifiable.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is incredible. David, that's just incredible to me. It's just incredible to me.
At least 65%. Intelligently controlled. But, when you have radical speeds beneath the ocean floor, going 100, 200 knots, 300 knots, and you got them in the going 10,000 miles in your surface radar systems, come on. And turning right angles, you know what? Hey, there's more than just, pie in the sky. You know what I mean?
Are you saying 10,000 miles per hour?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that under
the
water?
I identified one of these so-called falling stars turning right angles, and they target radar this right angle falling star, and it was going about 10K.
10K, making right angle turns.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never heard of a meteor making right angle turns at 10,000 miles an hour. I don't know about you.
Well, it's like their opinion was they're not going to attack us. It doesn't belong to any of our, competitors like Russia or other countries that. But at the same time, everybody is scrambling to try to recover one of these things that have fallen in the sea. Now, from my research, the Finch wasn't the only one that witnessed these UFOs being taken down. Okay, they were being witnessed and seen by other picket ships, planes on missions, military planes, transport planes. We're seeing them, but the Navy. The U.S. Navy, I forget what year it is, and maybe it'll come to me in my notes as we're talking, took charge. They actually took charge of the UFO and USO information. They had taken over charge of the information center on bogies and USOs. Other military forces like the Air Force, they didn't come into it until later. But early on, in 1941, the Navy started to get really interested. So some of these things just got by most of the people who were daydreaming or not giving it the kind of attention. They thought maybe the entertainment world was distracting enough for the general public to fantasize about these things, but the military and our government knew that it was a real reality check, but they didn't know if it was something that was going to be catastrophic or an invasion from outer space. So they wanted to keep the public in the dark until they got a handle on it. You see?
Yeah.
So,
Did you see any recovery efforts that the USS Finch might have been involved with? In the first episode, you told us that blockbuster story of being told to stand on the deck while that huge cigar-shaped object came by. But were there any other incidents where?
Well, years later, years later, like I'm talking about just before I moved down here, about 10 years, 15 years ago, because in 1994, I left the Wayland resident ghost house, the Gilroy, and moved to San Diego, and that's when I started to do my really groundwork research on Operation Dominic and with all the notes I had and everything, and so the last 21, 23 years in Southern California is when I got most of the information. And I had a phone number list of other sailors on other picket ships during Operation Dominic, and I had one number. I had one gentleman who was telling me a story about one of the picket ships. It wasn't his picket ship, but it was a sonar. There was a sonar tech, okay, that was operating one of the advanced sonar systems after they installed it in one of the dry dock episodes where they had the shroud. I don't know if that ship had a shroud on it, but they put one of these high-tech sonar detecting systems in it. And that particular picket ship was being, can you get this? It was being escorted back to, I don't know, Birmingham, Washington, or wherever it was, and they had some vital information. You see in the sonar, and I'm not a sonar tech, but this is basically what happens. When you go to sonar school, you spend hours listening to different pings to learn the identity of fishes and whales and stuff like that, ships, enemy ships, et cetera, et cetera. So you become very acute. And this particular ship, he was telling me, they had actually recorded the sound of a USO, which they had never done before. I mean, this was a little bit more revealing than the traditional, ping. It's an unidentifiable, USO that can't be, let's just say, marked or tagged. But this one particular picket ship was able to tag it. So they had this recording that they wanted to get back to the West Coast where they analyze it, and they dissect it and get what they need, because then they can send this out to the fleet, the sub-fleets, the surface ship fleet, so they can identify this as being an actual USO, So when they got the ship back into dry dock, they went down below the compartment, because the sonar room is below decks, It's probably just before the keel of a ship, if you will, where they have all the instrumentations, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they couldn't get the hatch open. And this guy is telling me they were really concerned because they couldn't get the hatch open. It was locked from the inside. So he's telling me over the phone, he says they had to get the welders, the dry dock ship welders, civilians, to come in and cut the hatch. And they had to get a hydraulic lift, come down overhead through the decks all the way to lift it up, because it was a heavy hatch. And when they lifted it up, oh my God, you won't believe what they found. The guy was hanging from the underside of the hatch. They don't know how it happened, but by the time they hoisted him up, all his body fluids had gathered at his feet, so he looked like a giant jello, or whatever you want to call it, a bag. And if you punctured it, all his innards and blood and everything would have splattered all over the deck. So they had to carefully extract him, because he had tied a rope, and they couldn't figure out how he could do it, because his hands were tied behind him, his feet were pointed, on his back, and he was wrapped around 3 times from his ankles to his arms to around his neck. And I asked the guy, well, how do you know all this? He says, my friend who's on a tender sent the photo department down there, because if there's a crime, they thought it was a crime scene, they wanted to make sure they got the photographs. And my buddy said he saw the photographs, and that's how he got the information. So they wrote it off. They wrote it off as a suicide in the sonar room below decks aboard this radar picket ship, and they were not able to recover the remnants of the recordings that they got out at sea. That they, everybody was excited about getting because they were destroyed. That's the story he told me. So when I wanted to do a follow-up on this guy when I was in San Diego, his phone number was no longer operative. I couldn't get a hold of him. I couldn't find out anything more about him or from him. But that's the story he told me.
David, what year would that incident have occurred when they recorded the sonar sounds? The actual
it had to be sending in after 1962 because that information he gave me, he said, was long after the Finch was relieved off of station in 1962, December the 7th. So I can't give you a precise date.
So after 62, what?
Yeah.
Is the sonar operator alone in that room, or are there other people working there also?
Well, there are others, but when they're returning from operations, and they're standing down, meaning they're not they're more on watch than they are, and it's cleaning the ship and preparing it for import, arrival, and so everybody's coming and going. And
I get it.
That particular department, I don't even know. I have no number. The numbers of sonar techs that are involved on a picket ship, I don't know what the complement of men are. I don't know. I don't have any details on that. I'm just passing on one of the stories I wanted to give you in this, this episode, which I found really strange.
Very strange, and it just, unfortunately, it's very consistent with what we know about how people who are witnesses to this phenomena, sometimes how they end up, because did this guy that you spoke to, did he seem to suggest that there isn't any way that this person could have committed suicide, that he had to have been murdered, or were they just really not sure?
Well, the hype of the conversation, my mind is going one way, and I'm sure this guy, because he had talked to his buddy who knew more about it than he did, he's just passing the information on. I'm thinking, go ahead, that's part of the big conspiracy. This guy was probably done in because they didn't want that sonar recording to get in the hands of people who would, pass it around. I'm thinking, well, how could this guy, because see, he told me, and I forgot to mention this, he told me that everybody thought that this sonar man was on leave, that he went on vacation when the ship docked, that he went on vacation, he went home on leave. And to come time to recover the recordings, and they're in dry dock, and they don't have to request any of the sonar techs. They're either on liberty, on leave, or whatever. So let's just go down, open up the hatch, and get it. Well, they couldn't get in because this guy was dangling from the underside of the dogs. They call them dogs that lock the hatches, and it's that little wheel you turn to open up, and that's where he was tied up. And his full body weight was holding the hatch down. They couldn't lift it up.
And the recordings were destroyed.
And the recordings were destroyed. He didn't say they were missing. He didn't say anything. He just said they were destroyed.
Jeez. And these recordings were considered so important to the Navy that this radar picket ship was being escorted back to Bremerton.
Yeah, it had more. It had its own little escort. It might have had a destroyer, and maybe another DE.
It had its own little escort, all the way back to Bremerton, Washington, at the sub base there, the naval base. And wow. Yeah, they didn't send a seaplane down to pick it up. They did, in those days, if the seas were complimentable, they would send a seaplane and pick up stuff. Or, we used to have our mail airdrop to us and all kinds of stuff out there, But this was a special escort. Can you imagine if they had that recording system today?
you wouldn't have to guess whether or not, it was a friendly or a foe or a USO. You'd know right away. You'd have a bunch of people
You'd
trained
know right
to
away.
know. Yeah.
Honestly, David, this type of story really bothers me because it's been so long that this sort of evidence has been coming forward. And the people like you and the others in our armed services who've been exposed to this type of information and these encounters.
Well, can you imagine? Yeah, can you imagine though? Yeah, can you imagine people who actually were seeing this one-on-one? They would button up. They wouldn't say anything. They would just pretend it never existed, because if they could do this or it happened to this individual, can you imagine what it would do to them? And I'm just going to repeat what I said. Yeah. I was a young 18, 19-year-old, and I was already married. Do you think I was going to go and talk about this stuff? Hell no. No way. No way, Jose.
No. It's why we're in this situation now, decades later. I mean, I was born around that time, David. I was born in 1963. And that's a long time ago. That's a long time ago, and still we don't know about the events that happened to people serving in the Air Force, in the Navy, these sort of events. And it's just extremely, I imagine to all our listeners, too, that this is extremely disturbing to find out that people have been killed over just the mere fact that they knew about these types of recordings. Not that they even had a piece of material, but just that they knew about it, that they had access to the recordings, and that in this case, the higher ups in the Navy were concerned probably that he was going to share this recording, that he had his own copy or something like that, right? And I think anyone who's listening to this would find that extremely disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, what's really disturbing is what's coming out now. We know about the Nimitz. You're learning about my experience, but you know who Paul Hellyer is, don't you? You know who he is, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Former,
just for our listeners, former Canadian Minister of Defense.
Yeah, he's got several channels up there talking about his view and his opinion about all this, the UFO and Roswell, and about the different entities or types of aliens on Earth, etc. But it's like my ET handler Whisper. I call him my Whisper, ET Whisperer too. And I just want to put this out there as a note. You know what? You're going to start hearing people talking about ET handlers, controllers, ET whisperers, because this is for me. I didn't invent this. This is what I referred to these, ETs long before I even got on anybody. You're the only person I've told this to. So now you're going to start hearing people talking about this. Well, I knew that we had witnessed a UFO on the Finch, but I had no idea that these things were being recovered by the Navy long before my sighting, according to Paul Hellyer, and in a couple of his documentaries, people can look his name up and go to YouTube and they can listen to this, about his exposing the CIA and the Navy, cooperating with each other to recover some of them that they shot down, because the radar system was developed back in 1941, according to him, to take these things down. And just a few miles out of San Diego, they took one down. Okay, and so I'm thinking, what? How come this news doesn't get out? Well, it's a tight ship. They call it a tight ship. In the Navy, we have a tight ship. And that's what they do. That's how they do it. That's what they do. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
No, David, and I want to say thank you again for sharing this information. I realized that you've shared it with us, with our listeners, our YouTube community here. I just want to say thank you again for, having the courage to come forward after all these years and the honesty to tell, just tell all these stories, because if it wasn't for you talking to us right now, these particular stories might be lost forever, And
well,
so thanks.
I got a couple of emails. There are people that are testing the water, and they'll say, "Tell me something. What can you tell me more?" I'm getting a lot from Australia, and I'll tell you my reason for Australia is there's a lot of USO activity around Australia, and that's my feeling. Not just a feeling, but it's my research tells me that's what's going on around there. But anyway, my opinion is, I told you that, I was young and married, and I didn't want to, cause any waves, so I kept it to myself, and I just repeated some things here now that are new to you and in the public eye, that people don't realize what really took place out there and during Operation Dominic. Well, the rest of the world was worried about the Catholic ramifications changing their rules, and they were worried about the Russian Sputniks and spy satellites, and they were worried about maybe a bunch of things like the Cuban crisis, and okay, but they never talked about all of the hundreds of UFO sightings in the South Pacific during Operation Dominic, And I'm thinking, well, we were in a different world. But I'm about to tell you something that I have kept a secret, like many other things. But this one, I thought, if the CIA wasn't going to get me early on, before, not knowing just how much I knew, maybe this next story I'm going to tell you, which is true, I was more concerned about being taken out. So I don't know just where to start, but I think I need to start with how the CIA pays, basically how they pay for these black op operations. And it's known, generally speaking, because of all the information out there on the internet, that they have to use funds that are confiscated from, the huge drug problems throughout the world, and the confiscation of the money and property and all that stuff they get from it. A lot of that money that is hidden from Congress, for example, in our government, is put aside for black ops funding. And it was allowed by the Kennedys and Nixon and Eisenhower, when Truman started it, putting money aside from all these, from the time we were in the war with Japan, the Japanese general Tomoyaki Yamashita, he had what was called the Golden Lily, gold treasure. Well, the treasure was never publicly distributed or exposed because it was pushed away by the CIA. It was approved by Truman, and he authorized this Japanese plunder to be held as a state secret, of best wealth treasures, and he confiscated it for covert operation funding, as a funding reserve for all this so-called black ops, which included the UFO, USO funding research to pay for the recovery of fallen UFOs or stolen secrets from other countries that were pertaining to UFOs and top secret, weapon systems, et cetera, et cetera. So the loot, MJ-12, it supported a lot of their operations. It supported also debunking a lot of the operations. The military, Navy included. During the war, they used to make these dummy airplanes and dummy ships to fool the enemy, right? They put them on land and on sea, and then the enemy would take the reconnaissance film back and say, the Americans are here. No, they're over there. They're going to invade there. And they're going to, they did the same thing with UFOs. They did the same thing. They wanted to encourage the public to get suckered into believing that they were extraterrestrials, to take the eye off of what the the military was doing, and that was recovering. Mm-hmm. So if you can't convince anybody, you confuse them. Okay, you confuse them. That's a standard. Okay, war strategy. And you can go deeper than that, but I just want to get to the meat of the story about this funding thing. I was in the Subic Bay, Philippines in 1975. Okay, in 1975, as a military policeman, which I was assigned as my duties, I was sent to Grande Island. Okay, keep that in your mind. Grande Island, 1975. If anybody knows about 1975, that was the close or the end of the Vietnam War. That's when we were taking all the refugees, right? Correct. That's when they were, that's when they were trying to get the hell out of Vietnam. Those are the ones that helped the United States. Okay, so just keep that in mind for a minute. Okay, I want to advance to around 1969, excuse the date on that. I am in San Diego right around 1980, somewhere around there, and I am wondering about this Subic Bay, Philippines thing, and then I put it aside because what I knew about Subic Bay in 1975 bothered me up until this time when I discovered. Have you heard of the movie? I don't know if it's still running. It's a franchise called Unsolved Mysteries. Unsolved Mysteries. Yeah. Unsolved Mysteries had an episode of a family man parked outside of his cul-de-sac home, who they found murdered, but the investigation proved that he was assassinated. And the ironic thing about this individual, across the cul-de-sac where he lived, was another gentleman with the same kind of car, the same last name, had a family with the same number of kids. And they tried to figure out, why was this average American that had kind of a clone family just by coincidence with the same last name, number of kids, same color car, why was he killed? Well, when they did some research, and this is how the story goes on Unsolved Mysteries that I was watching, this guy that was the target picked up and moved. He just picked up and moved before the investigation started on his neighbor being killed. And what they discovered was that the guy that was mistaken for the one they killed, he had a background in the military where he was involved at Grande Island. Oh my God. I'm watching this thing. Mm. And Grande Island, 1975, when I was military police, I was ordered to be a sentry on the island. Grande Island is kind of like in the bay. Okay, it's a whaleboat distance away from main shore Subic. And that's where they were unloading all these Vietnamese people before they would, decide what their fate was. But what my duty was to guard a reefer. You know what a reefer is? It's about the size of I'd say a 15 by 20, freezer that can be picked up by helicopter and placed down, okay? And it's like a giant refrigerator. And my job was to stand guard at this huge freezer, and about 20 yards from it, they had a chain link fence where they were quite literally dumping all these Vietnamese people and making them stand behind this chain link fence. There had to be at least 12 to 1,500 people, Vietnamese people. And they were all chattering in their language, and they obviously, I could tell because I was right there, that they wanted freedom. They wanted freedom. They wanted to be taken care of. But what the military was doing is that they were registering them, and they were demanding that they give them all. They wanted to know if they had guns. That was the order. So they had to give their blankets. They had to give their baskets. They had to give their briefcases. They had to give all this. So I'm standing right next to one of these tables, right next to me, that they're carrying some of the goods, and they have these regular shopping cart baskets you find in Safeway stores or whatever, and they have the personal effects of some of these Vietnamese people. And I see baby powder milk. I see cans of food. I see all kinds of stuff that these people were trying to bring back, as they're escaping Vietnam on these helicopters or whatever they transport them to Grande Island on. And there's hundreds of these baskets. Well, on the table next to that table are some military people with can openers and wire cutters and box cutters, and you're not going to believe what I saw them extracting. For example, from women's bras, they were taking gold, these little square butter cube slices of gold. They would open up these baby formula cans, and they would be packed with gold. I mean, these people, they were grabbing everything they could when they were escaping the Viet Cong, and bringing their family jewels. And the military was packing all this shit into this reefer. And I was to guard it. Okay, I was to guard it. Then about 24 hours later, I'm relieved. You have to eat, I have to sleep. So they put me back on the motorboat, and they got my relief, and we exchanged posts, and he stands to watch there. I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I don't have to go back, okay? I'm reassigned to walk the streets of Olongapo, and I'd like that because a lot of bar girls anyway. So anyway, let's go back to this film I'm watching on unsolved mysteries. Apparently this guy who was killed by mistake was taken for the real guy who stood watch at Grande Island. And this guy was a whistleblower, and he was in the process of talking to Congress, okay, about what he witnessed about officers and everybody, taking all the goods from the Vietnamese refugees that were being rescued from South Vietnam at that time. So I'm looking at this movie and I'm going, oh shit, if they kill that guy, excuse my French, if they killed that guy in that cul-de-sac back then, and this other guy got away free, they're not looking for everybody that witnessed that. Well, apparently he was the whistleblower who knew the officers by name and by sight who confiscated the treasures in that reefer. Okay? And the scuttlebutt. Now this is scuttlebutt. Okay? This is not a fact, and I don't know it is or not. But that group on Grande Island, I've tried to do my research and I can't find a darn thing. What happened to the Vietnamese people? What happened to them? And if they're still alive, did they ever get their gold back? Well, here's part of the glitch. There is nothing. And there's also some inquiry into the officers who were handling that particular transition for the Vietnamese, who come under fire because they can't trace how they became so wealthy when they came back to the United States and retired. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there, and hopefully, I don't know the officers, I don't know the men, I don't even know the guy who relieved me back there in Grande Island in 1975. All I know is that I did see what I saw, and I saw a bunch of crying, screaming refugees behind a chain link fence trying to squeeze through to get their property back, and it was being loaded into this reefer, and I don't know what the hell happened to all that stuff. So there it is. There it is, buddy.
Yeah. Wow.
So that
is quite a story, and we've
heard about. It all links to this black ops money. It'll go. Who's funding this stuff? Skunk Works and all this other stuff. What do they got? They got a secret closet. They're building stuff already that's on the moon. I don't know.
Well, so that could be one source of it, and we know from audits of the Pentagon that there's a lot of there's billions and billions missing from the Pentagon's budget. I read recently an article that these auditors who accounting firms to try to audit the Pentagon gave up. It was such a mess. They said they couldn't do it. So
yeah.
So it's another side of the story, and many people suspect that where is that money going that can't be accounted for? Is it going into these black budget UFO reverse engineering programs? We don't know, but it's certainly speculation, and you're showing another side of it where, a real crime was committed, and you couldn't get any information about what happened to those particular refugees. In the end, there was no records.
I did my research, and I don't know if the CIA or who's ever in charge of Coverup, and they do a lot of that. They have to. And listen, I'll say 85% of what the CIA, FBI, and everybody does, is for the better good of America's society. It may not be good for other countries, but it's for the greater good of American society. And whether you want to debate that or not, it's up in the air. But I'm not going to get into that. What I am saying is this: that there are some very, very corrupt agencies and support groups and people with special interests and lobbyists in our government that protect this invisible shroud. I like using that name in our government, and it's going to continue. And I'm going to give you a little brief example here. I wanted to go into, just let me add this: that recovery I told you about, that Paul Hellyer was talking about, 1941. Okay, it was off of San Diego, West Coast. Okay, and they found dead aliens, according to him. They were grays, and they were taken to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and that was in 1941. Can you imagine that? 41. When was it? 1947, when Arnold saw the flying saucers in Washington, whatever.
Yeah. 1947. That's right.
So look how early it was. But according to Hellyer, the craft was back engineered, okay, and it was taken down originally by a pulse radar. Listen to this: pulse radar. What year did Einstein and Tesla get together playing cards? It had to be way back then to come up with this pulse radar system that was being tested in Taiwan Island at the time when around that time. Okay, so dot the I's, cross the T's, people. Do your homework, do your research. So I just wanted to add that there, because how are they getting paid?
1941.
Yeah, 1941.
Yeah, that's so. It's 6 years before Kenneth Arnold sightings or the Roswell crashes, and we all
and my side.
That's the date where things start. Right? And here it's not something I had really heard very often. 6 years before, there was a recovery of a craft, and that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
A recovery of a craft deliberately taken down by pulsed radar. 1941. I mean, that's 4 years before World War II is even finished.
Give me a break. They were talking about a radar system at Pearl Harbor before it was bombed, and it was still in its infancy. Hello?
Yeah, and here it is already in existence.
Yeah. That's how deep this goes. That's how deep it goes. And I'll tell you, it goes even deeper, because when I mention, if we ever mention, we talk about Johnson Island, and you got a picture of it with the UFO that Air Force photographer took. Back during the Obama administration, they had an international meeting. Concerning the alien issue. And so the rumor goes that even the Pope attended that. And if you recall, here not too long ago, they had a big flap down in the Antarctic, where all the international leaders assembled. What's going on there? I don't know. Astronauts, the Pope, the presidents, leaders of different countries went down there. Now, what's going on with that? Why do they have to go there? I mean, they could have all gone to Florida, one of Trump resorts, but no, They have to go there.
I got to mention something, Brother Whitecrow.
Okay.
Paul Hellyer was at the citizen hearing in 2013. He was one of the witnesses who gave testimony for the retired senator and the 5 Congress people.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I'm sure you've heard about it. It was an attempt to have, a disclosure, event over 5 days at the National Press Club.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I remember.
I was there. And Paul Hellyer was one of the witnesses, and he said that, and he's always said this in his interviews, which makes it even more interesting, is that he never found out about any of what we're talking about here while he was Minister of Defense in Canada. He only found out about it after he retired. So even people in position with that level of, authority and status within the Canadian government, the top military guy in Canada didn't even hear about it. I forgot how many years he was Minister of Defense. I think it was around 5 or 7 or 10, something like this. But he said that it was afterwards, and he got interested because his son kept asking him about it, and he made calls to someone he knew in the Air Force here in the United States, and that person told him UFOs are as real in the skies above as airplanes. They're as real as airplanes, and they're there. And so, it's this information takes a long time to come out. It takes a long time to come out.
Well, I'll tell you, brother. One of the reasons why I think that's happening. This is what I learned from early on, being in the Navy. On my first command was the USS Kuntz. That was my first ship. Now, aboard the USS Kuntz, I learned very early on, there were Masons, Rosicrucians, there was witchcraft going on, there were devil worshippers. Now, don't get me wrong. 99% of the Navy is straight, okay? Crew cut, straight, shoe polished and starched. They're very professionals. But I'll tell you, like any metropolis, I don't care if it's a ship, a carrier, a tugboat, salvage crew, they have the same issues. They have the same problems. Alcoholics, druggies, prostitutes. As a matter of fact, I just want to put this out there. Gitmo captain just got charged with, I think it was Subic Bay. Get me straight here. No. Well, anyway, one of them got charged. The captain of Gitmo, is charged for killing his wife, the guy's wife's husband. And just recently in Subic Bay, a captain has been relieved because he was hiring prostitutes from Alongapo. So, at any level going on right now, you have groups that belong to secret societies, like the Masons and the Rosicrucians. And when I was aboard the ship, my very first ship, which was the Kuntz, when we were off ship and we were living in Navy housing, the stuff that was going on in some of those things, witchcraft, devil worshiping, and stuff. I mean, it's not rampant. Believe me, it is not rampant. But there are Ouija board readers. There are all kinds of weird shit going on in the military. Okay, and sometimes these things get a little out of hand. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. That these situations are I'm sorry?
You're saying that there are other types of situations that don't become public information also, not just UFO information, but people involved in esoteric and secret societies. And you're saying it's part of the subculture of the military to have these sort of people there. And you're saying that, if I'm getting you correctly, David, it's that the UFO information also remains secret, sort of in the same way, because it's not official information, right? It's sort of It's being suppressed. Like take the Rosicrucians. When I was on the Finch, there was a Rosicrucian, a first class, who was in charge of all the watchstanders. That means in my division, he'd go around and make sure you weren't sleeping on watch. Okay, he was a first class. Mm-hmm.
And he was in a Rosicrucian. Well, how did I know he was in it? Well, because he admitted it to me when he thought I was sleeping on a watch on a fan tile. And then, I felt his presence. And when he tried to sneak up on me, and I said, so-and-so, how you doing? And we just started talking. And I said, what do you think about these fluorescent glows the size of submarines or larger circling our ship? I see them and report them to the bridge. Do you get my reports? He said, yeah, we get your reports. He says, but listen, I want to tell you something. He says, they are intelligent. They're not whales. They're not porpoises. They're intelligence. And I said, what do you mean? He says, because I communicate with them. And I said, you communicate with them? You mean with sonar or water might? What are you talking about? He says, through mental telepathy. And I said, well, how are you able to do that? He says, well, I'm not going to go and reveal because I have an oath, but I'm a Rosicrucians. And so that stuck with me for years. Now, who are they? What are they? Who are they? And I just did a little research, but didn't do any in-depth stuff. But they're into the spiritualism, the Egyptian stuff, and they're like many ways, the Masons, and those different organizations, and they'll have an oath of secrecy. Okay, they have an oath of secrecy. And if you want to graduate and you want to get bumped up to a higher office in these different organizations, some called the New World Order or whatever the hell it is, you better keep your mouth shut and you only talk about things that you're allowed to talk about. So if they were being controlled by the inner works of those who knew the truth about USO UFOs on the Finch, they may not, I think they were just tools, or they were controlled by the powers that be, not to even discuss it. You know what I mean? So that was really odd. This Rosicrucian guy telling me he mentally, telepathically talked to the aliens aboard USOs. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm sure it's not the first time that military intelligence services attempt to use telepathy, or even individuals within those organizations just on their own who know about it say, hey, I wonder if I can, can I communicate?
Yeah. So anyway, there is a dark side in the military, but it's not publicized, and it's pretty much controlled. I remember when I was aboard the Nimitz, they had a big drug problem, and it became public. There was a few articles written about it, but that's kind of ongoing. You have your issues, like any small city aboard those big, large vessels, and in the small vessels as well. But there are some things that you just can't hide. You just can't hide. Well,
David, I just want to say one thing. About this. You've made reference to the recent events of the USS Nimitz. I mean, relatively recent in terms of their UFO, USO encounters. It's something that you've read and heard about recently in the past year, the New York Times article from December 2017 and so forth, right? You're familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Maybe by title, not necessarily by date. What are you referring to?
Right. Well, Commander David Fravor from the USS Nimitz, one of the F-18 pilots in one of their squadrons.
Oh, the Tic Tac? Yeah, the Tic Tac?
The Tic Tac, because you made reference to this, and David Fravor has been very public about this. He is not afraid to give interviews about what they saw. He's told us that these events, in his particular case, happened over a 2-week period. It wasn't just a one-off encounter. It was happening for 2 weeks. It just happened to be out in these exercises. And he said he was not told not to talk about it. He didn't sign any non-disclosure agreement. And he has been giving interview after interview, even as recently as a few weeks ago, to the Fighter Pilot podcast. And he says, just like you are saying, that many more people know about this, but they're very reluctant to come forward because of, they're thinking about their careers and so forth. And so I imagine you're not surprised by these revelations? Because it sounds like it's been going on for decades and decades and decades.
Well, yeah, that only supports what I keeps the consistency of my stories, but with greater distance between each reveal, and this story is probably going to be one of many coming forward in the immediate future, especially with the response that I notice a lot of people are getting from your channel on the subject, not just from me, but other witnesses. Whether it's UFO or paranormal. But I'll just say this. I think there's two agendas here. I think the United States government and the the powers that be that know more about even the president, realize that in order to preserve and protect our traditional way of survival in the United States and the economic standards that we have, are going to have to reveal super weapons that have been people want to call it back engineered or I call it ET downloading into individuals of science and medicine, etc. Information that has given them the credit for discovery. I firmly believe that the United States is going to have to reveal some of these advanced technologies and weapon systems to control being attacked, literally attacked by I'll just say it, by China or Russia or Iran or other countries. It could be a small country carrying a suitcase nuclear weapon somewhere. The United States has to start revealing, and Trump came out recently and said something about he's implementing certain technologies that are going to aid and assist and protect Americans, and he can only get that information by the powers that are going to release it based on technology that are 20, 40, 50, 100 years in advance. So where did they get this? Well, I kind of leaked out my personal opinion. I think a lot of this is ET downloads into the minds of people who are credible scientists and like you, and people who can contribute without being with being bipartisan or being in favor of preserving what is good for the greater good. So I mean, I'm not surprised. His story is a couple months old. I'm not sure how old it is, but it's a couple months old. It's a few months old. But how long is mine? How long was my story, brother? How long has it been? Almost 57 years ago,
57 years. And no, David, I think that's such an important point that you're making is you lived and you were a member of the Navy. You served in the Navy during a time when the whole issue surrounding UFOs, USOs was to keep it secret. Yeah. And you've even shared an episode today where someone might have been murdered over this just to keep a tape recording out of public search. Now it's totally switched around in the past couple of years. It appears because folks like Commander David Fravor are just talking as much as they want to, even being encouraged to talk about it. Our President Trump has made these kind of cryptic comments here and there, changed secretaries of defense just in the past couple weeks to someone who's more interested in these topics. And I've been told by scientists that I've talked to personally that exactly what you said is that if we don't get a handle on these technologies, our adversaries will develop them first because we're not talking about them enough. And it's become an inverse national security issue. It's flipped around. Is people like you knew about it and have known about it for decades and weren't really allowed to talk about it or were encouraged not to talk. Now it's changed because we've realized we'll fall behind very quickly because the other countries are more open about it than we are. So that's a very good point, David. It's a very good point. A lot to think about there. You sent me a lot of other pictures. Did you want to share some of those stories from the pictures? I mean, I really enjoyed looking at that picture of your house in Watsonville, California.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I show my mother's picture and me with that house. as you continue to edit some of the things, I wanted to send you a couple other pictures. Maybe I will, but I'll leave it up to your own discretion. They're pretty much relative to what I talked about. Glass Beach, the cave. Those are Google images of a cave similar to what I approached swimming inbound from that. Going out there with the snorkels with my buddy and stuff, and then the inside the grotto.
Is that the grotto where you got trapped inside almost? Is that it?
No, that's similar. Those two pictures of the cave entrance and the grotto very, very much, represent what it appeared like. Although there was more coral on the inside, and the stalactites, I guess that's what you call them, hanging from the ceiling were longer. And of course, when I dumped my body waste, the different types of fishes that scrambled to eat it, I couldn't find a picture on Google about that. But anyway, if you want to use those, you're most welcome to. Some of the other pictures there, like Glass Beach, you can show those. Whatever you have there, you just go at your own discretion, implement those in the existing, show that you have.
I'll just remind our listeners here, our viewers, that we're talking about an incident that David referenced in the previous episode where we had a conversation, episode 3, where he talked about going for a swim out in the ocean near Guantanamo Bay and getting caught in a riptide and ending up inside a grotto only to have the water level start rising. It was very that miraculous ending where the wave just lifted you up right onto the cliffs there.
Yeah, and next year, next year when you get back together, I think this might be considered the final episode. But over the next year, I'm going to be working on illustrations. I'm going to be working on paintings relating to the incidents we're talking about, because I want to give a visual. I want to give the audience a visual, and we're going to do, one-on-one video where we see each other and talk to each other on the live, and we'll have it a pretty good.
So you're going to be creating some illustrations that go along with a lot of these quite fascinating stories you've been telling us.
Yeah, I want to do charts and graphs and plot some geographical maps and have some illustrations showing the different events, aboard the Finch and the repair ship Disparity, and also some of the paranormal events, especially the one where I was hitchhiking and I was picked up by the Men in Black, things like that.
Yeah, that Men in Black story, David, that one I have been thinking about that one because it's such an incredible story. Just the way and I would encourage our viewers to go back. That was, I believe, in episode 2, right? And that, I think it was episode 2. I can't. Yeah, but that was quite an incredible story. Did you ever have any encounters with those types of entities again? Or was that it? That was a one-off. They sort of saved your life, didn't they?
Yeah. I like what you said. Do you think they saved your life? And I believe they did, actually. If you would have seen that Latino man with that big gun, I think they saved my life, I want to do an illustration of that. I think that's so cool how they did that. How in the hell did they raise this? We're talking about anti-gravity this and anti-gravity that, How did these ETs raise, a 1956 Chevy pickup, off the air like that? You know what I'm saying? How did they do that?
It's an episode that sticks in my mind, David, from that conversation. I just see it, the vehicle there being levitated off the ground with the wheel spinning with this guy that thought he was going to get you. And all of a sudden he's the victim, right? Yeah.
That's hell, man. You know what I'm saying? That's amazing.
No, but here's the thing, David. At the very end of the ride, you woke up and you're back in San Francisco, and they don't even turn around and say who they were. They just let you out.
Yeah, it's funny because when I woke up, if you ever go into San Francisco at night, you know, you're on the freeway and you're on a kind of like an overpass coming into downtown Market Street. And I live not far from there. I live near the San Francisco Mint, you know, where they make the money and stuff. Mm-hmm. I live near there.
Yeah.
And they took me there. They took me to that location. And I opened the door and, you know, I've been over and said, hey, thanks, you know. And that's when I noticed the funny little hats, you know, and the black, you know, and they didn't look like they had any hairline, you know. And they didn't say, hey, you know, welcome back, you know, hope you have a safe trip, you know, back down, you know, south, blah blah blah. No, they just I closed the door and they just took off. It's amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I have
almost. Yeah, no, that's just incredible. It's a great story. Go ahead.
I love this because we spent a lot of time talking about some backstories here, and I haven't really got to the meat of what I wanted to on this one. But let me give you a kind of a relative thing about these ET handlers. That there's a couple. I think there's different types because the man in white. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about the man in white. When I moved down to San Diego, I was living my dream as an artist, you know, and I would show my art on the street, you know, on the main street in Ocean Beach. And one day when I had my display out on the sidewalk during Farmers Market Day, this gentleman in white, actually, white, you know, white jacket, white pants, everything, he came up to me and he says, "You better keep your mouth shut." And he looked like a businessman. He didn't look like, you know, some mentally ill person, you know. And I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "You better keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you." And I says, "What are you referring to?" You know. And I was showing my display in front of Gold's Gym. I've got a picture of that display and me standing there. I'll send it to you one day. But anyway, I had been working out quite a bit, so I was a pretty good sized dude. So I stood up from the stool I was sitting on, and I looked him in the face, and I said, "What are you referring to?" He says, "You know what I'm referring to." He says, "You keep your mouth shut about what you saw in the South Pacific." And I'm going, okay. And so he just turned around and he walked off. And I never saw the gentleman again. But it was that period of time. I think I was making phone calls, you know, and I just got a new computer. I was doing some research, you know. I wasn't talking to anybody about it, and I don't think I had even gone to MUFON on that first trip. So I don't know how you knew what I do.
What year was that?
Well, that had to be in 1996, 1997. Yeah.
Relatively recently, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So when I say a man in white, I mean, you know, he didn't look like CIA to me. He didn't look like, you know, anything but the powers that be that know what I'm doing, you know, because, you know, and I was on the phone, so maybe that's how they got it too. You know what I mean? I was talking to these people from these other long list that I had of people I wanted to talk to that were on some of those picket ships. So, yeah. Yeah,
and it's just still amazing to me, David. This is more than 30 years after that incident on the USS Finch when you saw the craft come by and
well, it stands to reason now that I think about it because there were more UFOs, USOs, I think, combined in the history of witnessing and exposure and recovery, if there was, which they're all indication there were more recoveries, and they just wanted to keep it hushed up and allow world events, crises that were going on at that same period of time. Remember, what I witnessed was from 61 to 62. Can you imagine what occurred after that or before it, according to Hillier? I mean, if that's all the public had to do was to focus on those tests that were going on down there, and even if you removed, even if you removed the Cuban crisis, and that never happened, with Russia, firing off the world's largest nuclear bomb, and the U.S. trying to keep up with them, I don't know. We were entering space, We were doing all, the Berlin Wall was going up. There was all kinds of stuff going on. So who would want to pay? Who would want to pay attention to what I witnessed out there? But now it's coming back to haunt them. Would you say, brother? It's coming back to haunt them?
Well, the universe has a way of making us catch up with reality, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, you just can't hide these things forever. It just comes back. And the longer you've been hiding it, the worse it is, because there's decades of lack of adjustment of our culture to the phenomena, right? And all of a sudden, you're coming forward, and we're hearing a lot of other witnesses. There's many witnesses, by the way, from the USS Nimitz. There's the radar control operator. I mean, recently, I'm talking within the last year or so. And yeah, I agree. It's coming back to haunt them. I have to say, you kind of knew this was going to happen. It came back to haunt the Soviets too.
Yeah, but
with the way that
yeah,
it happened to them too. They ceased to exist. Okay, so this is what happens when you don't adapt to reality.
Yeah, there's I saw two interviews briefly on YouTube. One was from a white Caucasian, and one's from a black guy. The black guy was on Gitmo, and he witnessed UFOs on Gitmo, and I didn't even bother to write down the channel. And then there's a guy in the park in Hawaii who was an ex-military or still military who was talking about his sighting when he was stationed aboard the Nimitz. So, these things are coming together, and I'm thinking, wow, now is a good time to expose a lot of what I know, and let's see if they can connect. Or if they don't connect, at least we have enough, to say, listen, pay attention. Because now we have a backlog, and we're getting more people stepping forward and supporting the true facts of what happened, Because people like me,
right.
if it wasn't for you, Simeon, if I didn't get your email, sir, if I didn't get your email, we would not be having this conversation, And let me tell the audience something. When you move from place to place, now I'm just going to give you an example. In my lifetime, I've owned 18 vehicles. I've had 3 repossessions, but I've lived in over 50 residences, from apartments to homes, in different sized cities. I've moved around a lot. Okay. And if it wasn't for, Simeon, I'd still be packing all these notes, all these charts, all the research I've done over the years, and they'd still be in that box. If it wasn't for Simeon, you folks would not be hearing this, because he picked up a story that I made a comment on one of his channels, and he made contact with me. So we have him to thank. We have you, sir, brother, to thank.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that, David. We all love hearing your stories. And I will say other people are coming forward, too. I know that you recently made contact with Terry Lovelace, who
yes.
I interviewed him a week before we actually did our first YouTube interviews, and he has his own experiences from the Air Force. His book,
yes.
18 Minute Devil's Den. And I know you're going to be on his show. I believe it's January 28th. Is that right?
I think it's sooner
24th.
than that. Yeah. I think it's the 24th. The 24th.
24th. It's just that there are people coming forward from other branches of the military with their own stories like this, their own amazing stories that, just like you, David, that we're only hearing about it decades later.
Yeah.
Decades.
Hey, let me give you one here. That I think the audience are going to enjoy, even though it's not directly related to UFO. When I was aboard the Sperry, that's the ship I told you about. That photographer friend of mine was going to process the film, and the film was snatched up. Okay, Okay. The Sperry that I was assigned to during when I was still assigned to Conquer Dispatch, Admiral Dornan's command, I met my warrant officer. He was my division officer. His name is Vernon Gow, and he's deceased now. But I'm going to tell this true story that involves him in honor of him. Like I said, because of my art talent, I got close to know officers, and it just seems like when I went on liberty, I had a more mature relationship with individuals. And I'm not saying that enlisted men are not mature, but it seemed like I had more fun and more exciting times when I was around intellectual people. I don't mean that, as a bad hit on people who are not intellectual, because I don't consider myself very intellectual. But anyway, Vernon Gow and we would love to go camping on weekends when we were on board ship. And one of our excursions when he was alive, we would like to go to the desert, and we would take our guns out there. And what desert? Well, just let me say it was between El Centro and Calexico in Southern California. Now, the reason why I'm not giving you the exact location, because I don't want everybody running out there looking for Montezuma's treasure. But this is the way the story goes. On one of those late nights that we're camping out, telling sea stories and drinking our Jack Daniels or whatever, it was a full moon. And as I'm looking at the foothills that surround the desert that we're at, and they must have been about 3 or 4 miles away, I see a hole or a dark spot, and it appears to from my point or perspective, and I wasn't drunk yet, it looked like a cave. So I point out to Vern. I say, "Hey, Vern, come over here. Look at that. Let's go check that out in the morning. It looks like there's a cave at the foothills." He said, "That's a long walk." He says, "By sunbreak," he says, it's going to be kind of warm. I said, "That's okay. We'll take plenty of water. Because where we were, we couldn't take the 4-wheel vehicle that we had. There was too many gullies, et cetera, et cetera." And so I said, "I'm going to place some rocks pointing to that area, and I'm going to do it in twos so I can line up the two posts or some rocks that I set up, and I could eyeball a straight line to where it's at." He said, "Yeah, go ahead and do that." So we finished our night, conversation and drinking, and went to sleep, woke up the next morning, and after breakfast, we just went ahead and lined up the sites that we had built and started walking. And we walked. Well, it was like 6 miles, and by the time we got to the foothills, we looked around, we couldn't see no cave. We couldn't see the cave, And so the long journey back, including the ride back to San Diego, we were totally exhausted. So the following weekend, my wife at the time in Ocean Beach where we lived, she'd like to make breakfast, on Sunday morning and everything. And I'd read the Sunday newspaper. And there happened to be an article that was a special about Montezuma's treasure. And according to this story, one of his ships got off course during a big storm. And from that west coast area where the floodwaters used to come in, were high enough, and this galleon ship carrying gold, Montezuma Cortez gold, got off course, and they went inland thinking they were going to just go into a shallow ravine or whatever, and they could take a break and continue the journey up the coast or down the coast, wherever they were going. And when they discovered that when the flash flood ended, that they were in the middle of a desert. And the desert was actually the location where I had been with my buddy Vernon Gow. And so they had this treasure, according to the article in the San Diego Tribune. They had this treasure, and they didn't want to leave it on the ship. They wanted to bury it. And they didn't want to leave markers. They didn't want to keep it a secret, et cetera, et cetera. So it was on this particular day and particular month that it was a full moon. And they noticed that the full moon casted a shadow on the side of a mountain. So they marked the spot, and that's where they buried the treasure. So I'm thinking, when I'm reading this article a week later, I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, that's the place where Montezuma's treasure is located, So I call up my brother Vern, he's giving me a bunch of crap. He said, no, that's impossible, that's impossible. That ain't so, So if I'm looking back at that, you know, the year was 1968. Yeah. And I'm thinking way back then, well, I moved to San Diego. My buddy Vern, he passed away years later, and he actually died from radiation sickness. He was working at San Onofre nuclear electric plant down there. But anyway, I moved down there years later, and I never told a story to anybody. It just stayed in the back of my mind. And then about 5, 6 years before I leave San Diego to move where I am now, I run into an old friend, and his name's Bill. I'll just say his name's Bill. And he's a wanderer. You know, he's one of these hippie guys that likes to go and grow marijuana and to sell it, and that's how he made his living. But he'd go all over so that he'd never get caught. You know, he knew the places where to grow his weed. And so just out of general conversation, I said, "Hey, Bill," I says, "how would you like to go find Montezuma's treasure?" And he started laughing and joking. He said, "Okay, tell me your story." So I told him the story. And I gave him the exact coordinates. You know. And Bill was somebody that I would see maybe once every 4 or 5 months. He wasn't a regular ocean beach. You know, he'd travel up and down the coast. You know, he'd go up to Humboldt County, come back down where they have a lot of money, spend it, and then go back and do his thing. But then he didn't show up after 5, 6 months. I wondered, and a mutual friend, I said, "Whatever happened to Bill?" He says, "Oh," he says, "we don't know." He says, he went down to El Centro, you know, toward El Centro, and he mentioned to his daughter that he was going to go down and find a treasure. Well, they found his pickup, or his van, excuse me. They found his van, but they never found him. And to this day, he's missing. Yeah.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah, well, I thought that little tidbit there, you know, that's an actual true story, but I'm not going to give the coordinates because I don't want the border patrol to think you're trying to smuggle immigrants across the border or anything. You know. But,
yeah, so he went out looking for that treasure in the same area that you had been camping, right?
Yeah.
And just disappeared.
Yeah. And months later, when we had mutual friends, and I just asked him, you know, I didn't tell anybody that, you know, that he's going to go look for a treasure that I know the location of, et cetera, you know. Yeah. I didn't mention it to anybody, but then his daughter said, you know, that he told her that, you know, the last time she saw him, and she told this to a close friend of his that I knew. She didn't tell me that he went looking for this treasure, and his vehicle was found, but he's missing. He's missing to this day.
Do you have any intuition or gut feeling about what might have happened to him?
If I was writing a book, I would say that some coyotes found out what he was doing, and maybe he had some of that treasure on him. I don't think they caught him digging it, but I think maybe he might have had some of it on him, and he got taken out for whatever he had on him. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, he did. You think he might have found it?
Yeah, I think he did, because you know he had all the equipment. He had the metal detectors. He had the pick sack. He had the gold pans in his car. You know, I mean, this guy he was an outdoorsman, but he was always looking for that next buck. You know, that next dollar. And so being an opportunist, I mean, that's the way he was, you know. But it was always nice to see him. It was always nice to hear about his adventures when I was down in OB, because his trip would take him, you know, up Northern California and so. But I was really sad to hear that, you know, that no one found his vehicle. And then I felt kind of guilty. You know, I felt kind of guilty even telling the story, because what if he did find it and he lost his life over it? I mean, come on, folks, you know. So I really don't want to know. So if you ask me a question, I'm just saying, well, you know, it could have been anything. He could have picked up some hitchhikers and they took him out, you know, robbed him for anything, not just maybe what he had, you know. So over the years, I just let it go.
Yeah. And this location apparently was a cave or something, right? Or so. Yeah,
you know, the article I was reading, it just kind of it suggested that's how the conquistadors, or Cortez and his men, they didn't want to leave any markers, so they buried it by the moonlight. And there's only one way you can bury it, and it's not in the ground. Okay, a cave is horizontal to the ground, so I think anybody that's looking for it, they need to pick up their metal detectors and and point them toward the cliffs or something, because they intended to, those people back then, they intended to come back and pick it up. They intended to come back wherever they went. But they didn't dig no holes, because that's a flash flood area. Can you imagine if they dug a hole? If I was a conquistador and I dug a hole in the middle of a creek bed where the flash floods come through, it would wash all the treasure away. That'd be kind of dumb, And in those days, you could check the weather charts. If you go back way back then, I don't know what century it was, but if you go back then, they'll tell you that the canals and channels from the ocean, from the west coast, used to go inland, and that's how the early Native Americans used to travel down from the foothills to go get their protein. They'd canoe down when these flash floods would come, and they'd pick up all their oysters and crabs, and they would paddle back before they would dry up.
I see. I get it.
So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's another great story with an unknown ending.
Yeah. But when I left the Navy, and I got my medical checkup, they said, well, you're retiring now. You sure you don't want to stay in for another 10 years? And I said, no. And he said, well, the average age of a retiree in the military is 15 years. So I retired in 1980, and look at here it is, 2019. I'm still alive, brother. Yeah. But I think it had to do.
Yeah, you're really beating.
I think it had to do. Beating the odds. But I think it has to do with that near-death experience I had. What I quit doing, all that run-amucking,
Yeah, you mentioned that at the end of episode 3. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it had a lot to do with that, because I'd be dead by now, riding motorcycles and all that other stuff, drugs and chasing women. You made an agreement with that entity during the near-death experience that you were going to clean up your act, right? Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
I tell you, Simeon, if anybody has a problem and they want to be taken there, they'll come out of it. They don't need therapists. They don't need medical, analysts. If you did and you went to where I went, you'd come out cured. You'd be convinced and come out cured. I believe, this is just one of those things off the top of my head. I kind of just think about or thought about, and I don't know if it's true or not. But I think everybody builds their own black box. Like an airliner. Whatever goes on in your life is a black box, man. And if you go to that black hole, the event horizon, you get sucked up. All you've got left is that black box, and that is you, and nothing else. And when it comes time to open that black box, everything in your life is revealed. So I think people ought to start thinking about, better start building some good information that's going in there, because that's the way it is, man. That's how I think nowadays. But I just want to say that 15 years, I lived more than 15 years, and I've had some real strange experiences, but at the same time, here's another one I want to give my audience. When I was a kid, when we moved to San Francisco after that incident on Grant Avenue or Grant Street in Watsonville, we had a 6-inch square television, and I wasn't a very good reader and everything. So if I had a pencil and a piece of paper, I would draw, et cetera, et cetera. And my mother thought, let's give him a puppy, let's give him a dog, keep him busy. So they got me this dachshund, these weenie dogs. It was a female, and it was a puppy. And my mother used to come into my bedroom, and she would see this dog sitting or standing up, begging for a toy or something. And I would tell my mom, I say, Mom, watch Penny. That was the name of the dog. I called her Penny, because she was the color of a penny. And the dog would just kind of voluntarily go to the corner of the room and sit down and look up at me. And then I'd say, now watch this. And then the dog would go to the middle of the room and stand there and look up at me. And I say, now let me step outside with you, Mom. Just go outside the door and now close the door. And we'd stay outside. And I said, we're going to go back in 10 minutes. And I can guarantee you she will not move an inch. She will not move an inch. So we come back in 10 minutes, and Penny is still sitting there, just waiting for me. And your mother says, how do you do that? I says, I think about it. I see a picture in my mind, and I think about it, and she's still there. So that's where I see her when I left. And so as time moved on, when I would go to the store, which was about 6 blocks away, my dog would come with me without a leash. And she was much older now. So I would give her the same thought command because she couldn't go in the store. But I'd leave her a block away, And when I'd come back, she'd still be sitting in the same spot waiting for me. Okay? And so that's when I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was it was something that only with her and me it was possible that I could have this kind of relationship with an animal. And after a few months, my mom got rid of her because she got in heat, and other dogs are coming around. So I lost my dog, and I was really sad about that. Well, as I got older, I was right around 12 or 13 years old. I would have to go for the summer months, go work in the garlic fields. If I wasn't working in the garlic fields, I would spend time with one of my uncles in an orchard. He lived near Pajaro River, which was a river that went into Watsonville, California. And it was a small creek river. And I would love to go into the creek because there it was quiet and it was nature. And I had this desire to just be quiet. And sometimes I would build kind of like on the embankment of the creek bed, I would dig a hole kind of like a little cave and sit there and be quiet. And all these animals would come around, from snakes and rodents. Even a baby mountain lion cub came by one time and sat next to me, and I wasn't afraid. I mean, it was kind of like a world. It was a fantasy world, and I would have these wild canaries fly in and land on my knee while I'm sitting there. And these garden snakes would come around and they crawl around over me and around me. And I think a couple of times king snakes would come by. No rattlesnakes or anything like that. And frogs and all kinds of stuff would come by. So one day I decided I want to take some of these little critters home with me. So I had a gunny sack. I had planned this. I picked up some field mice, some snakes. I picked up these little critters. I took them home where my uncle was. He had one of these old porcelain tubs. And I dumped all these animals into the porcelain tub. And you don't know oh man, when he came home and then my mother come down at the same time, well, hell broke loose when they saw what I had done. So they made me gather up all these critters one by one and put them back in the sack and take them down to the river, to Power River, and dump them off. Well, I thought everything was cool. I thought everything was cool. So my mother goes into the bedroom and she opens up, I don't know what she's looking for, one of the drawers, and she found this mouse. I had taken a mouse and put him in a little, kind of like a little jacket, and he had a little wagon attached to him. And what I did was I made a Walt Disney character out of him, a real mouse, but I forgot I stuck him in the drawer because I was afraid he'd be discovered, and I forgot to feed him. And so he died there, harnessed to a little wagon I had made. I felt so bad, But my mom, she threatened to kill me if I ever did that again. So I never did that again. But that was one of the child innocence that was leaving me when I became a young teenager. I don't know. You can't get me near a snake. You can't get me near any lizard. I will not go near one. I don't know. I just can't. But back then,
what happened?
I don't know. I don't know what happened. I think my other ESP's powers came in and just pushed those aside. Because after that, a couple years, I got into this. I told you about my imminent death forecasting, and this was in 1965 through 1967 when it was the hottest. But when I lost my animal whisper powers, it had to be 1963 through 1964, somewhere around there. Because in 1965, 1967, I mean, today, me and the crows have a relationship, but and pit bulls that would kill anybody else, I can walk up to them and pet them, but anybody else can't get near these vicious dogs, and I can. But other animals, I just don't have the appeal to be that close to them. But the imminent death thing seemed to take over like a brainstorm. And so from 65 to 67, when I was stationed at NAS Lemoore, for example, I went to a wedding. One of the employees, the civilian engineers, was inviting some of us military to his daughter's wedding. And they have, the wedding dance where the groom and the bride, they go in the middle of the dance floor. And that's when I got to this, sensation of imminent death forecast for the bride. And I just focused in on her, and I felt really sad because I knew she was going to die, and soon. And the next couple of days after I went to the wedding reception and everything, we got the news that she had passed away in an accident, that they were going on their honeymoon to Reno, and the groom survived, but this guy's daughter, she died, and they wanted to know if I wanted to go to the funeral. So out of respect, I went to the funeral, and she was wearing her bridegroom outfit, her wedding gown, and that's how I saw her when I saw her dancing with her husband on the dance floor. I saw her in her coffin. That's the vision I had with her bride, so it was identical. And that's one of the most vivid imminent death forecasts I've ever had in my life. And so I would, and to this day, I don't like staring at people too long because I don't want that sensation to come over me. And the one that really shook the hell out of me, I was in Chinatown, San Francisco. And by this time I was working at GTE, and I went up there with some friends, and it was in the, I forget what district, it was downtown San Francisco. And I was at an intersection. And you know how people line up to cross the street when the light turns? So I just happened to be watching this guy. It was a Chinese guy, Japanese or Chinese, Oriental guy. And he was standing there, waiting and he was in the front of the crowd that was gathering to cross the intersection. And I got this imminent death forecast chill. They call it a chill. When I look at a person, I get a chill. I look away right away because I don't want to know. I just don't want to know, Simeon. And I get the chill. Oh, man, I tell you, my friend, it doesn't come every day. I can't do a scan on every time I go out the door of my house and then look and see who's going to burn out that day. But if it comes, I know what it feels like. And looking at that Chinese man across the intersection, I got the chill, and I knew he was going to die. But my impression was he was going to die that day somewhere. You know what I mean? He was going to go home and die, or he's going to go somewhere, wherever you go, where Chinese people or Japanese people go, and their own traditional, daily routine, whatever. And so I'm waiting for the light to turn. And guess what? When it turned green for me and everybody, 100 people ready to go across the way, he drops dead. He drops dead right there in his track. He did not get a chance to cross the street. Now I'm being pushed by people behind me to go across the street. So when I get the other side, there's some people that don't cross because they're all circled around him. They're puzzled, and some of them are crying, and some people are saying, "Call the police," get an ambulance, and some say, "No, don't bother, he's dead." Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of my DSP that I would not be sad to see go. Okay, I would not be sad to see that imminent death forecasting.
Unwanted gift that you have.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, when I met Ben, we know who Ben is by now. I hope the audience knows who Ben is. when I was in high school, I wasn't just an introvert by choice. You know, back in 55, 56. Okay, 1956, 1957. I was always by myself because I had what was called eczema. Do you know what eczema is? The skin disease, eczema. I had asthma. I had asthma and eczema. But my eczema was so bad. I mean, it was really, really bad, where my skin would crack. And I don't want to make anybody sick out there, but if you know what eczema is, it's a reddish rash that can get really, really bad. So my mother, who was an herbalist, she would always give me medicine that she concocted and stuff, but she would have to wrap me up because a lot of it was ointment. So my arms were wrapped, my neck was wrapped. And I was really embarrassed to tell people that I had this disease, or whatever you want to call it, because I didn't want to scare them away, you know. So on a hot day, man, I'd have long sleeve shirts on and all that other stuff, and I had my shirt buttoned up to the top, you know, which is the style of today of some of the Latinos in LA, but I didn't invent it, okay? I wore it that way because I didn't want to expose the wrapping I had around my neck and my arms and stuff. But when I met Ben, you know, in about 3 or 4 days, all that shit went away. It just went away. You know? I never had an issue with it anymore. And I don't know
Never again?
Never again. Never again. I was born with it. Never again.
Wow.
But I felt like a mummy every time I went to school, you know, and I started high school, 9th grade, 10th grade, man, I was there. I was so embarrassed, you know. But after it went away, you know, oh my God, I didn't realize how grateful I was to, you know, to be healthy again in that respect. And then, you know, I started to get friends and have relationships, you know, and I felt real good about myself, you know. But I think Ben had something to do with that. I really do. You know. So.
Yeah, and our viewers can go back to some of the previous episodes to find out more about Ben. But that's just another fascinating story, just gone, just like that.
Yeah, it was just gone, just like that. Yeah, yeah. Hey, let me give you this one story about my animal whisper ability. I don't know if this is going to make you laugh or it's going to scare the hell out of people. In 1971. I went to the San Diego Zoo. I was stationed there in San Diego in 71. So I went to San Diego Zoo with my wife, and we went down to the sea lion enclosure. And they got a green fence, you know, with a moat so that you can't get over to the sea lion enclosure. It's an open enclosure, and they have a big, giant pond. They can swim around and all this stuff. Well, San Diego Zoo, they also have run-amok animals like chickens and ducks that aren't caged, you know, and you feed them, you know, as you walk along, you know, the different areas where you could watch lions, tigers, polar bears and stuff. I just happened to be at the enclosure for the sea lions. And the moat they had there separated the observer spectators by a large 8-foot chain link fence with some shrubbery in the front on the other side. And then they had this little drop off, you know, and then they had the pond built up, and you could see the sea lions swimming around. But on that particular day, there were no sea lions, but they had some chickens. They had these Benny roosters in there, and I noticed there was a Benny rooster, mother hen. She was in hysterics, squawking, you know, and it had gathered. A crowd had gathered around the chain link fence when my wife and I got up to it. And I realized right away why the mother of the bantam hen was squawking. Her little chick, she had a little chick that was swimming around in the pool, and it couldn't climb out of the pool because the sides of the pool were really slick. You know, there's no way it could grab. So it was getting, and then there was a sea lion, a small sea lion making circles, and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, that seal's going to eat that little chick. You know, the chick is only maybe the size of an egg, you know. So guess what? Guess what the animal whisperer does? He jumps the fence, I jumped the fence, and everybody is some are shouting, "Hey, get back here, get back here." And some are saying, "Go for it, man. Go for it. Go save that little chick. Go." I'm not paying attention. I jumped that moat, and I don't know how I did. It had to be 9 feet over or whatever. I just jumped it. I don't know how I did it. And I got to the edge, and I jump in the pool, and I get that little chick, and I throw it up on the embankment. And now I'm figuring, how in the hell am I going to get out of here? Okay, so I have to take off. I have to take off my shoes and my socks so I can get a grip on the side of the pool. And I grab it, and I get up there, and guess what happens? Oh my God! The big sea lion bull, which I did not know, was in residence, decides to come out and investigate what all the screaming and yelling is from the people watching this big event go on. I take one look at him, and I'm, at that time, I'm shorter now because of age. I was 5'7.5", right? I take one look at him, and just him with his flippers on the ground and his head straight up, he had to be 10 feet tall. I mean, he's huge, 8 feet tall at the minimum. And he's wobbling toward me, making these sounds, and the blubber's left to right, shaking the earth as he's getting toward me. And I'm looking, where in the hell am I going to go? So I jump up on this embankment, and I skittle-doo all the way to the top, and guess who's waiting for me? The San Diego Police Department. Well, all this is going on. The rangers that protect the zoo, people against the animals, or vice versa, they call the San Diego Police Department, and they haul my ass to the office, the entrance, and I'm sitting there with my wife and everything, and I don't feel like a fool. I feel like I've been inconvenienced. I feel like I've been inconvenienced. And the ranger comes up to me, and there's a cop on both sides of me, and they're looking at me, he looks at me, he says, "Do you realize I would have to kill a $2,000 sea lion for a 50-cent chicken?" I didn't think about that. I was thinking about saving that little chicken, So they let me go. Yeah, they let me go. But that's the kind of person I was, and I think I'm the same way. If I saw somebody or somebody that needed rescuing, I wouldn't even think about it. I just do it, So.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, I had an encounter with sea lions in a zoo when I was an infant, so I know the feeling. Though I was an infant and you were, an adult, but they can be huge when they're coming at you. And
yeah. They can be very very, very intimidating.
Yeah, and, they're huge. They're big. And...
Yeah. That was just kind of an advanced indication of the character I was evolving into, not fully, or to a point where I would go to animal shelters and rescue cats and dogs and stuff like that. But I can remember when I was in the 7th grade at James Lake Junior High School, there was a science fair project that my science teacher wanted me to participate in, and I had no idea why. But I think it's because I had a question to you. I gave him a question one day. I said to my science teacher, I says, have you ever considered, is there a way to test the strength of spider silk? And he says, I don't know of any. He says, why don't you enter the junior science fair, project, and I'll help you build the test equipment. And you just have to collect the spiders. And I says, okay, hey, I don't have a problem with that, because at that particular time and age, nothing, I was afraid of to do. So I came back with wolf spiders, black widows, and everything else after the instrument we were going to use to test the tensile strength of spider silk. And what it involved was, if you can imagine a stand with glass tubes opened at both ends, and they sit in a rack, and we had chosen six tubes, probably an inch in diameter glass tubes. that sat in this rack with the bottom open and the top open, and there was a clearance at each tube at the bottom that was about 3 inches high. So there was that clear space, and the task was to take a popsicle stick with a spider on it and to shake it until it would drop through the glass tube, and there I would fasten a little tinfoil platform, and we would put little weights on it, okay, and weigh the different spider silk strength, tensile strength. And I would chart this down on a chart, and it ended up being a big chart, explaining the experiment and stuff like that. But the process of getting, used to make me laugh, the process of getting these spiders to go down that tube, my science teacher, biology teacher, he was scared of spiders. So he wouldn't touch any of the spiders, and I felt at home when they'd crawl all over me, the black widows, the wolf spiders, all this stuff. And he was amazed. How do you do that? They seem to do exactly what you want. And I said, well, I think about what I want them to do, and they just do it. So I went to the science fair. My mother was in attendance. She was so proud of me. But I came in second place. For building the spider silk tester. Yeah. So that's in line. Tester. Yeah. So, that's registered. If they want to go back to San Francisco, look up the science fair for students. I'm in their books, And,
it's such a good thing to think about, David, because spider silk is made from a whole bunch of different proteins within these glands that the spiders have, and it is such a remarkable substance. I read that it was used for gun sights during World War II in the planes. Is that right?
Wow. I didn't know. I don't know as much as you. Yeah, that's true. I heard about that too. But you probably know more than me.
Remarkable. Yeah. We always think that what we're doing is so amazing and so great. All these inventions that we create, right? Everything that we do as humans, and we're always so proud of ourselves. But then you always come across something that nature designed without any interference from us that is like 100 times better.
Yes.
And we always forget this, is that nature designs these incredible substances and structures, and we always are amazed by human technology, and yet nature's technology can often surpass anything that we can do, and we still can't create spider silk. So great story.
Oh, I know. That's a fact. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at such little critters too. We're trying to think about these nano devices, and things like that. Nature's already created a lot of them,
Nature's already created it. And to go full circle here, all the way back to UFOs, just for a second, these nanomaterials and metamaterials that we're told that these craft are made out of, the Tic Tacs and all the other types, I'm told there are 8 or 9 different types of materials that are being looked at right now that we know about. Just from the one group that's gone public, the To the Stars people. But
amazing.
Those materials, probably when we find out how they're made of, these bilayered materials, probably going to be very natural, something that already existed, and just somebody else figured out how to do it before we did. It's not that they created it, but they took something that existed, like spider silk, and just found a way to tweak it just slightly to create the hull of a UFO, or the instruments that they have on board, whatever those are that we're hearing about. So it's just something to always keep in mind, that whatever we do, nature probably already found a way to do it first.
Oh, that is so true. It's amazing. We live in amazing times. And the closer I get to the other side, the more I appreciate the fact that there is so much more to learn and to explore and discover, from the smallest to the largest, from the least to the maximus. It's amazing, and I'm just so thrilled that I whatever remaining years I have, that I can express and share some of the wonders that I've come in contact with. One of the things that comes to mind, I didn't mention about my automatic drawing. There was there was a gentleman on YouTube that was published a channel in July 6, 2016, and the title of that YouTube channel is Alien Interview Part 1, Secrets of the Universe Revealed, from Project Blue Book. And the artist illustrator that made this animatic puppet, it was kind of like an interview with an alien. I think it's recently been reactivated. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because back in 1956, 55, when I lived on McAllister Street, in the house where Ben, and the levitated Bible occurred, I remember. Yeah, right. I remember in my bedroom. I used to sit in my bedroom, and I used to sketch these automatic drawings of these odd facial characters, just their face, just their head. And I swear, Simeon, if you go to that channel that was published in July 6, 16, it's called Alien Interview Part 1, Secrets of the Universe Revealed, and it's part of Project Blue Book. If you look at this guy's animated art, puppet that he created with a CGI, that's identical. I say, sketch to puppet reveal of what I was drawing back in those days, back then. Okay, so just out of curiosity, if you want to check out the automatic drawings features that I was creating back in 1955 at that McAllister, poltergeist event in San Francisco, you check that channel out. I wanted to run that by you because that's really something, in every detail.
Yeah, I will definitely take a look for that.
Yeah.
Well, Brother White, I have a feeling we're going to have another episode.
Yeah, because I haven't got it. What time is it?
Well, we're approaching the 2-hour mark. We're approaching the 2-hour mark for our recording.
Yeah, we're going to have to do another one, my friend. Yeah. I'll tell you the one that really gets to me is that picket ship hanging. That sonar.
I know.
Hanging. I mean, that's something else. I can't imagine where we'd be today.
I have to tell you, David, that it was a difficult story to listen to, and I appreciate you sharing it because we need to hear the truth. And as usual, your stories have got me thinking in a whole bunch of different directions at once. And that one in particular, it's just so eerie and disturbing and just wrong in so many ways that it should motivate us to want to get past this point where we are right now, where we don't know the truth about this phenomena.
Yeah.
And that we need to hear about it to get past this point where people are being either dying or being killed simply because they saw something or heard something or have access to a tape or a video that we all should be watching and listening and finding out about. And a very selfish group of people seem to think that they have the right to keep us from knowing about it. And as you said about a few minutes ago, it's so interesting how it turned out for them, isn't it? Because now it's all coming out, right?
Yes, and more. And I'm even encouraged. I'm even encouraged by some of the caterpillar walkthrough people are taking to test the water, so to speak, by contacting me, and the comments I'm reading suggesting that they do they want to reveal, or how much is involved? Do they have the ability to even have enough to open up a discussion? I think that has a lot to do with it, Simeon. We have a 2-hour show, and maybe they have just one incident that could really, open up Pandora's box. But they're hesitant because they may feel like it's not that important, that it's insignificant. But you know what? I encourage my listeners. It doesn't make any difference. Email Simeon. Let him know. Talk one-on-one with him. It's painless. It's comfortable. I've had a great opportunity and fun expressing myself, and I've given a lot of this to Simeon, hoping that, some of it has been exciting, some of it has been, tragic, and some of it has been dark, and some of it is so curious and disturbing. Is there a solution? I don't know. Is there, an end? I hope, but it's just fascinating. I want to give you this one here. How much time do we got?
We've got about another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll reach the limits of our recording session for this time with this telephone.
Okay, let me throw this in real quick. Okay, I was on the East Coast and I'm about due to retire, and I get an automatic inspiration. Okay, and I don't know if it's coming from my ET handlers, whisper or whatever. I set up an easel, and I decide to just take the oil paint, whatever gets on the brush, I'm going to start painting. And the amazing thing, within 45 minutes to an hour, I do a complete painting of the man in the bubble. Did I tell you about this last week?
The man in the bubble. You go ahead and refresh my memory. It doesn't.
Okay. You go ahead and stop me if I've already given this story. Okay. But what it ended up being was a naked man in a transparent bubble in the cosmos, and the middle ground, is kind of like the Trinity. These three figures, and each have a hand. One hand holding up the bubble, one hand under the other, suspending this bubble on their hand. And they're in a dark clothing, but their features are very distinguishable. But they're elderly gentlemen, like the elders, you might say, in Native American folklore, the elders. And behind them is this energy. It's like atomic energy. It's like nuclear energy going off. And underneath the Bible, their cloaks turn into the universe, where there's planets and cosmos and all this other stuff. And I don't understand. I couldn't understand, what the heck does this painting mean? You got this naked guy in this bubble, takes up 2/3 of the painting area, and his back is to the observer, and his hands are up against the bubble, looking up at these three figures. I'm going, well, it's an interesting painting, but what's the symbolism here, And so years later, I came across a statement or an article about what Aristotle believed. And he believed infinity evoked chaos from which the world was thought to emerge. Okay, primeval state with no natural laws or limit, devoid of all forms and devoid of all form and content. But if the universe is infinite, this is what he thinks. What would happen if a warrior went to the edge of and tossed a spear at the edge? Okay, where would it go? It wouldn't fly off to an infinite journey. Rather, it would, join the motions of the stars.
Did you draw that out in a sense in your painting, or is that what it became, or what?
And this is what captured my thought when I read that. It ends up in a crystalline sphere, a sphere that encircles the earth. And I'm going, whoa! I did an automatic painting way back then, and I couldn't resolve what was the purpose of it from my ET handler, and I was able to produce it. Well, anyway, the painting got stolen. It got stolen, so I don't know where it is today on the East Coast. Somebody owns that painting somewhere. Yeah.
Wow, the crystalline spheres. That's such a... We've really gone full circle all the way back to Aristotle's, idea about it. That's really incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Well,
and
Brother Whitecrow.
Yes, sir.
No, it's been another. Did you want to say something else? Go ahead.
Well, it's like, I can't do it in the philosophical manner that you do, right? But I feel really good about some of the instances I had. Like, one of the things I'll go in detail next time is the Orbs. When I moved down to San Diego, like I said, after we left the family haunted home up in Gilroy, I I wanted to open up an art gallery, but I didn't know where. And one day when I lived in San Diego City, not Ocean Beach where I really wanted to go, the window was open and I was taking a nap. And as soon, you know how you get sometimes you just wake up, you just kind of lie there and clear your mind and your thoughts. Well, the window was open and the wind was blowing the curtain back and forth, and all of a sudden this orb comes in through the window, and it's just kind of like a glow. Okay, and at first I thought, well, it's not night, it's not a car headlight shining through the front bedroom, coming into the bedroom. It must be a reflection. Somebody's got a reflection because it's during the daytime. Anyway, the orb settles into the middle of the wall facing me as I'm laying down, and it opens up. It opens up with a picture of this building, this 2-story building that I'm unfamiliar with. I've never seen it before, but it's like watching a movie on your bedroom wall that's projected, and then it pops like a bubble would pop. It just boom, it goes away. Well, I don't mention it to my wife when she comes home from work. She might think I was doing drugs or something or whatever, which I don't do. So I just put it in the back of my head. So one day we're going to Ocean Beach because we love going to Ocean Beach, spending the day there. And I come to the intersection, Sunset Cliffs and Voltaire. And right there on the corner is the same building I saw in the Sphere. And she says, come on, the light turned, go cross the intersection. Because I'm just staring at this building. The light turns and I'm supposed to cross the intersection. Cars are honking for me to go. So I pull over to the side where there's an empty, parking space on the block where this building is. And she says, where you going? I says, I'll be right back. I get out, I go around the corner, and guess what? There's a for rent sign on the studio that I eventually rent. Wow. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is a good.
Yeah. So I spent 20 years in that building, and I'll send you pictures of that. Yeah.
Yeah. The orb showed you where to. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, David, we're going to have to. I imagine we're going to have to continue the conversation at another time.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Next week, I got Terry Lovelace, and then maybe the week after that we can get back. Yeah.
Sounds good, David. I want to thank you again for sharing these amazing, incredible, and important stories with us. And
well, you haven't, tell the audience they haven't heard about the reptilians and the grays that I've seen, and where I've seen them, and what they told me why they're here. Boy, I tell you, there's some stuff here. There's some stuff here. Now I've only seen them. I've only seen the reptilian twice and the gray once. But they give me enough information to last me a lifetime.
We'll have to compare notes on that.
Okay. Okay.
But thanks again, David, and we will talk to you again for another episode in a couple of weeks. How about that?
Excellent. I look forward to it. And thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the generosity, Doctor.
No, you too, David, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Thank you. Bye-bye.